Well, welcome, David. Ex-Commodore, life member of the CYC. You joined down here in the late 60s. What are your early memories of the club and the characters and the boats at that time?
Oh, what memories. I was sort of fortunate as a kid that my grandparents lived up the road, and as was the deal in the late 50s, 60s, you had to go and see the grandparents on a Sunday, and no junior sailing in those days. And I used to beg my father to drop me off at the club on the way as they went up to see the grandparents, and I'd walk around the docks and play, just mess about down here for an hour or so, and then go up and do the dutiful grandparents thing. So I've been hanging around this club since I was about 10 years old, and it was just a treasure trove of characters and rickety old docks and boats that I thought were fantastic in those days. But you look at them now and you smile. But the magnificent Solo used to berth a couple of berths out, and you'd stand there and drool at boats like that. It was just fantastic. But I was probably an absolute pain in the neck to a lot of people, because as I got a little bit older, I'd hang around and try and get a ride on a boat. Ask, can I come for a ride, mister? And normally I was told to bugger off, but you persevered. And, but I was very lucky that I sort of, Boy Messenger picked me up, and I did a couple of races on various boats with Boy. And then Charlie Middleton was looking for a crew for Calliope, which was a Carmen class, and Boy was sailing on Cavalier, which you know all about, and he bumped into Boy and said, you know, any young blokes that might want to come? And I was sort of seconded to Middle Harbour then and sailed with Charlie Middleton. But the characters around this place, I guess the one that really sticks out in my mind in those days was Vic Meyer. He was sort of larger than life and rough as bags, and just, it was amazing. Nick Casson, he was here with the Lolita, and I can remember getting involved in a working bee here. It was about, it must have been 13 or 14, painting the side of the old clubhouse. It was an old shed. But it's just such an iconic place, the Cruising Yacht Club. It's just, there's so much history and so much camaraderie and so forth for this place.
But the boats, you mentioned Calliope and Cavalier and those boats, I mean, we cut our teeth on those, and at the time we just thought they were the greatest thing out, 29 foot 6 inches long. Took us a week to get to Hobart, went about 4 knots downwind, 4 knots upwind. But I mean, you look at the boats today, I mean, it's obviously no comparison, but we just, at the time, didn't we? We think they were great little boats, and they were. Seaworthy, sea-kindly.
You could go anywhere in those boats, and plenty of people have.
Yeah.
But I think they were all really good boats in those days, but you're right, everywhere you went 4.5 or 5 knots.
Yeah, that's right.
But I was sort of lucky. I got from that, Boy Messenger again got me involved in the 12 metres, and I got training in that 1970 squad. I met a young bloke named David Chantalou over at that time as well. So it's amazing how the wheel turns.
That's right.
But
and then from Calliope, the Carmens, you moved on into the 43s.
Then I finished with the America's Cup, and Peter Cole picked me up, and I got very involved with mainly through the 12 metres. I'd met Peter, and he was designing and building the Cole 43s, and I he asked me to sail with him on.
And he was running the hood sail off at the time.
That's right.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And so I sailed with Peter for a couple of years, and we did very well with that boat. It was great fun, and there were 3 or 4 of the Coal 43s. Had some fantastic racing, and some notable characters there. The 1970 Hobart race, which was a pretty heavy race. And from there, I got picked up by, or gathered in, as my friend Tony Cable would say, by Maxie Crawford and Sandy Schofield. And those guys were sailing with Big Bad John Gilliam on the Koomooloo when he bought her. And God, what fun we used to have with those guys. They were the real old salts with Astor and Bacchus D and so forth. And I was the kid running around behind those guys, and they were good players.
But they were fun on the water, but also off the water. Didn't you used to meet of a Tuesday night over at Comaraderie and with all those characters, or?
The early days used to be the Ship Inn down at Circular Quay, because it shut at 6:30 and you could be home for 7 o'clock dinner, living in Mossman, so you could keep out of the shit by getting home for dinner. But I don't know how we used to drive in those days. But the Ship Inn crowd started because Brucey Moxham was one of the crew on the Astor, of which Maxie Crawford and Sandy Schofield were very, very good crewmen on. And he was a barber, and he had a barber shop down at the quay. So he'd knock off at 4:30 and go over to the Ship Inn, and we'd all traipse in, and I was a builder, so I'd knock off at 4 o'clock and we'd be down there. You get a couple of hours of a few, 6 or 8 schooners, and off home to dinner. Some of the antics we used to get up to on the way home, and it was good. But you're right, from there, when the Ship Inn started to wane, we used to drink up at Comaraderie, at the pub up at the top of the expressway, and that was a ritual on a Tuesday night. And
but that camaraderie's been lost a lot, don't you think, these days? I mean, there's still camaraderie on the boats, but the whole scene is different.
Yeah, well, I think the drink driving put a squash to that, because in those days, I guess we used to push the envelope a little bit, but you'd think nothing about having a nice session down at the club after sailing, and then you might go off for a meal afterwards and a couple of bottles of wine, and then go home at 10 o'clock. You'd drive everywhere. And of course, when the breathalyzer came in, it sort of slowed that down a bit. But I can remember one day we were supposed to do a winter series, and it lightened off and nothing happened. So we finished up. We spent the day on the bar, and I think it was Hankin said, I think we should go and have a Chinese. So off we traipse, and no, it must have been a Saturday race, because we couldn't buy grog on a Sunday. So we had to buy all the grog on the Saturday night, and my car was parked outside, so we put all the grog in the back of the car, as we were taking a few girls for a sail on the Sunday. And we're heading off for Chinese down at Chinatown, and going down William Street, some bloke came through a red light, and I went straight into the side of him. So this was a bit ordinary. I pulled over and thought, gosh, I'm going to be in trouble here, because I'd had a few. And the bloke that was with me, who'll remain nameless, jumped out and ran off. And I thought, well, that's bloody nice of you. Leave
You can't name him.
Leave your mate. And next thing, the Constable Careful came along and was reprimanding me about this, and I said, well, yeah, okay, I hit the bloke, but I said, he came through a red light. And fortunately there was a witness around. Anyway, this constable was getting quite irate with me, and the old sergeant came along and listened for a minute, and he said, Constable, come over here for a second. So they toddled off, and next thing my mate's back, and he's got a handful of peppermints. He shoves all these peppermints in my mouth. He said, here, this'll help you. So I'm madly chewing these things, and the sergeant arrived back, and he said, now tell me what happened, son. And as I tell him, all these peppermints come bursting out of my mouth. He just shook his head. He said, look, he said, I think you've been unlucky, but he said, you shouldn't be driving. So he said, just piss off. So next thing my mate says, well, we got all the grog in the back of the car for tomorrow. So he hails a cab. The cab pulls up against my wreck. He opens the boot and he started moving all the grog, and the cop just looked at us and shook his head, turned and walked. We were very lucky. But we get to the restaurant, and there's Mickelbar and Hankin, and say, well, where you been? We're late. Oh, gosh.
Now, you mentioned the 12 metres. We could fast forward to the late 70s, early 80s, and you became involved with Bernard Lewis, who was a well-known property developer, and he purchased Gretel, the original 12 metre, and you took that to Hobart, what, a couple of times? Or
yeah, 3 times.
3 times, and you got second in 1980.
Yeah.
12 metre to Hobart's a big effort. What was that like?
Well,
besides being a submarine.
Yeah, well, it was interesting. She was a lovely boat, but by jeez, it was wet. I guess we were pretty young in those days, and whether I'd do it now, I think I'd probably think twice about it, but in those days, you were invincible. It didn't matter. But yeah, I was very lucky with Bernard. He was a wonderful guy, a real mentor. He bought, the story with Gretel is that she was purchased from Packer by Alan Bond and used as a trial horse, and then when he'd finished with it, he sold it off, and Jock Sturrock bought it in Melbourne and raced it for a bit. She didn't get too much maintenance, and Bernard bought it for 50 grand, and he was going to use it as a prop for one of his property developments up in Queensland, up at Huntington Harbour. And he realised after he bought it that the canals were too shallow for it, so he had it sitting on the mooring in front of his house, and he thought he liked the look of having a boat like that, and didn't know anything about sailing or boating. And I got asked to sail on it because I'd sailed on it back in the early 70s, and it just went from there, and we had a wonderful relationship. Raced out of this club for 11 years with Bernard, and we were very successful with Gretel and Vengeance and Sovereign.
Well, Vengeance was formerly CYCA from Western Australia, Rowley Tasker's boat. Then you took that to Lion Island's Victory in the Hobart race. Yeah. Which must have been a great thrill.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. We were on a real roll then. Had a reasonable crew, and Bernard was a great owner, and nothing was spared in preparing the boats. Yes, he tried to buy it about a year before, but Tasker had an exorbitant price on it, and then in '81 he sold it to Bernard, and we bought it, and 3 weeks later went off to Hobart, and just I think we sailed pretty well, but we got some good breaks and took line honours with her, and she was a pretty good boat.
Well, then in 1986, I think it was, Bernard decided he was going to build a maxi, and you project managed that for him.
Yes.
And Sovereign was launched. First Hobart was a bit unfortunate, you pulled out with mast problems, I think. Take us through the project managing a maxi boat. You know, it was a huge exercise, and with great reward in 1987. So tell us a bit about that.
Well, it was funny, Bernard thought that he'd like to go on the world circuit. He saw these maxis racing, and we were in Hawaii with Vengeance, and he met Jim Kilroy and thought that he'd like to become a member of the Maxi Owners Association. And
the Maxi in those days, about 76 to 80 feet.
yeah.
Right.
And he thought that Vengeance was a Maxi and we should be in the Maxi Association. Apparently, I wasn't present, but apparently Kilroy sort of looked down his nose at him. It was colonial.
Yes.
So Bernard decided that, bugger it, I'm going to build one of these things, I'm going to beat that bugger. So we talked about it for a while, and then Vengeance was starting to get beaten by the newer boats, and so Bernard decided to sell her and build a new one. We did some research for quite a while, and I was heavily involved in that. Nirvana came out and raced against Condor, and Bernard was very taken with her style and appearance. So we formed a good relationship with David Pedrick, the designer, and I'd known David since the one-ton cup in 72, and we therefore started to work up what it should look like, and we were heavily influenced by Bumblebee 4. She was a good boat that was around a few years before, and that style of boat really appealed. So we worked up the design, and then we put it out to tender, and the tender prices to build a boat like that was pretty steep. So I did some research and found that we could probably build it ourselves. And again, following on from Graham Freeman and what he did with Bumblebee, I thought, well, you know, I could do the same thing. And we actually engaged the same builders and set up our own yard and built the boat. And it was having had the construction management experience, I just applied that to building a boat, and it was a great exercise. We had a wonderful time. We formed a very good team that put that boat together, and as Paul Kelly, the builder, said, it was a pretty crisp operation. We built the boat in 9 months, and it was quite a boat. As you say, unfortunately, we had a 50-cent bolt break on the mast in the Hobart of 86, and we had to pull out when we were in front.
Good story.
Good. I just want to get into 87.
No. Okay, this is take two, 3rd of April 2012, David Kellett with Peter Shipway. Peter, it's yours.
Tell us about the 87 Hobart victory on Sovereign.
Well, after the disappointment of 86, we just picked ourselves up and we thought, well, we will race every race that we can with the boat out of Sydney and Queensland, and make sure that the boat is absolutely in tip-top shape for 87. And we had a remarkable year where we were never beaten for line honours, I think, in something like 30 races that year. And we'd won many of them on handicap, and whilst it had been done by plenty of good boats, to do it as consistently as we had, we were a bit surprised and delighted. We sailed it all up and down the coast, Hamilton Island, all the regattas, and then for the lead up for that 87 race, we finished up in the New South Wales Southern Cross team. We'd been sailing pretty well, and for it to cart a big boat around and do so well, and against the far 40, the far 40s, a bit different to today's far 40s, but they were all the rage in those at that time, and they were hard to beat. We were very, very lucky and I think we had a good team, sailed it well. Potty O'Donnell, the Olympic gold medalist, was our principal helmsman, and what a wonderful guy he was. He could wring that neck out of that boat and go to windward and get so high and so fast. I learned a lot from Potty. Off we went to Hobart. We had a very nice run down the New South Wales coast, and we had our main competition was the big ragamuffin, which was the old Bumblebee, which Sid Fisher had extended and was quite potent, had a new rig on it, and but we were managing to beat her. There was the old Apollo, the Gherkin, with Vince D'Amelio and a lot of the old Rooklyn boys on board. They were sailing it well, but we had the edge on them, and we had a very nice run down to the top of Tasmania. We were ahead of the race record at that stage, and then a southerly front came, as it always does, and we just stuck her down and went reasonably well with it, but we had a bloke named Michael Coxon on board, who Coco in those days was hadn't done that much on big boats, and when the southerly came, was just wanting to sail change after sail change after sail change, and on those big things they're pretty hard work, and you need about 10 guys on the foredeck to get a number one up and down, and changing through as we were going, we really slowed the boat down, and next thing I looked out, I was down doing some tactics and navigation with Sidey Hammond, trying to work out which way to go. And I looked out and there was Ragamuffin. She was only about a mile and a half behind us, and we'd squandered about a 10-mile lead. So I was a bit cranky about that, and just settled the boat down and just said, righto boys, just put the 4 on and let's just get this thing going. So we really chomped along then, and we found that she was a fantastic boat in those conditions, and it was just high and fast and just really going well. And we finished up at Tasman, which was only a couple 100 miles later. We were 5 hours in front of Ragamuffin, so we'd really pulled out on them. Got around, had a reasonable run up the river, up to the river at the Iron Pot, and then it just shut down, and we drifted up there, as we all have, and I was really nervous going up the river that year, and we could see rags running with the sea breeze starting to build from the Row. We were sitting just inside the Iron Pot. I could see this unravelling, but we held on. We won by 30 minutes. It was an interesting race, and then of course the breeze continued to shut down and we took the double, which was a huge
First Australian
thrill
boat.
for. Yeah. Well, yeah, I hadn't put much weight on that, but Gordon Marshall said to me afterwards, you know, you realise that you're the first Australian boat, and I was like, oh, Rani was the first. He said, well, he was British, and it was he registered it from Rourke, so you're the first boat from CYCA to do it. So we were thrilled, and it was a great reward for Bernard, who had put so much into sailing with the maxi boats. And an interesting aside in that race is that Ian Johnson and Kathy, who were the multi-hull aficionados at that time decided that they were going to race us. And they set off on Boxing Day with us, and I've never been a great fan of multi-hulls, but it was, we were interested to see how we went, and we beat them by 10 minutes.